help support my channel. I have merch with terrible dinosaur puns on it, and I also have a Patreon where I have giveaways every 4 months. Hey everyone, and today I'll be working on this Eofauna model of a Giganotosaurus. I'm going to be turning him into the Hyper Giga from the amazing game The Isle. So, as you can see, this is the Hyper Giga, so I got quite a significant amount of changes to make to this model before it will look anything like the Hyper Giga. So first, I need to cut off this jaw because this jaw is not split enough. So first things first, I'm going to shift the jaw to the side, revealing the little peg, I guess you can call it, on the other side, and I'll be cutting that with a sharp scalpel. And that's the jaw off, as you can see. It's a little peg that I cut. It looks pretty funny like this, actually. I should keep him like this. Hi guys! Okay, so I've got the bottom jaw now, and I'm using my little handsaw, and I'm going to be cutting directly down the center to split the jaw in two. So that's the jaw split in two. I'm now using my Dremel to shave it down. Okay, so now I gotta glue the jaw back in place. So I'm just using a super glue just to tack it on. It's not to permanently hold it. The two-part epoxy will do that. So this is just to hold the jaw in place while I add the two-part epoxy. And yeah, I'm just adding more in there just to tack it down. It looks pretty ridiculous at this stage. Okay, so the split jaw, it has like a thin area in between, so I'm going to be using armature mesh to build up the sort of armature where the clay will go. So I've got the armature mesh here, and I'm just tracing where I want the jaw to go. And again, I'm just using my super glue just to tack it down. And that's the armature mesh in. We're almost ready to sculpt. So now I've got my Sharpie, and I'm just eyeing out where all the changes and modifications need to happen. This isn't like I'll be sanding over this later. As you can see here, I'm sanding over all my drawings, but the markers help me eye out in my head where I need to make the changes, so it doesn't really matter that I'm shaving everything off now. But yes, I am shaving the belly smooth now because I need to carve in some belly scales. So I'm just using my Dremel tool to sand that all out. So now I'm using a scalpel and a bunch of other wood carving tools just to carve in the belly scales. Got to be very careful in this part because it can be very easy to slip and cut my finger. Thankfully that didn't happen. So that's how we're looking so far. I'm pretty happy. So now I start the two-part epoxy sculpt. So I'm using the two-part epoxy milliput, and I'm bulking out the shoulders because the shoulders on the Hyper Giga are a lot thicker and bigger, and also have sort of a different sort of scaling to it, more square pattern. I'm using my silicone tools here to carve those square patterns in. This is just my pointer tool to start carving in the individual scales, and I'll come in with my silicone tool with water on it to round out the edges. I don't know if it's the right way to carve in scales, but it's my current way to do it. And I did have someone ask, is two-part epoxy clay an air dry clay? No, it sets with the mixing of the two parts. So now I'm using my wood carving tool to carve out the leg scales. So the legs don't need bulking out, but they do need some squarer scales carved into them. So what I'm doing here is going over my Sharpie marks and just carving in those squarer scales. Now becomes the long process of making teeth. I had to make so many teeth for this guy. It took me a very long time to make, many hours of just making tiny individual little teeth and setting them aside to dry for later. The painful part of this sculpture was the teeth. Okay, so now I'm beginning to merge the jaw onto the head to make it a more seamless part of the sculpt. So I'm using my 2-part epoxy and I'm squeezing it into the joints and the open areas and into the mesh. You can see I've also sculpted one of the arms, bulking it out and adding longer claws. Now I'm taking a break from the mouth to let it set, and I'm beginning sculpting on the back scales. So I've just rolled out snakes of clay and then I pinch them into the shape and use various silicone tools to push it and pull it into the shape I need. So I'll continue on sculpting the back scales. So I'd like to let everyone know that this guy is up for sale currently on my Instagram. So look for the Instagram post with the word auction across the front of it. On that post you'll find the rules, please read them, and the current highest bid. This is a silent auction, so it is private. I don't speak about who the winner is unless they announce it themselves. So, rules first. It is a silent auction. DM me or private message me with your bid or offer. If you bid or make a false troll bid, you will be banned permanently. I will keep the post up to date with the highest bid, and it will run for 2 weeks. You must be 18 plus or have your parents' permission to bid. Postage is not covered in your bid. I will calculate that at the end of the auction and give you a quote. I post worldwide, and I will not cover import tax. That is something you'll have to figure out your end. I know some countries set different levels of import tax, and I will be putting the value of the item on the box as I do insure and put tracking on my post, just to keep the item safe. So yes, if you're interested in having a go at winning this guy or want to purchase him, just head over to my Instagram and look for the auction post. If of course there is no bids and he doesn't sell, I'll just leave him up for sale at the minimum amount that I would like to have for him, which will just be covering materials cost. Okay, let's continue on with the tutorial, shall we? So yes, I'm using my silicone tools to push and pull the different back scales and get the shapes I want, and of course I use a toothbrush to give it nice texture, and I'm using water to smooth out the 2-part epoxy. And like I've said multiple times before, I have a small window of 2 to 3 hours to work, so I only work in small areas. So lots of back scales to work here. This guy has a lot. But I'm only working on about 4 back scales at a time, just so I don't wreck the ones prior. And there's my gunky toothbrush I use to create textures. The gunkier it gets, the more effect I believe it gives. That's how we're looking so far. But I've realised as I'm sculpting the back scales, the tail seems a bit too long from the reference. The tail on the Hyper Giga seems a lot smaller than on the toy, so I'm giving it a measurement here just to double check. So that's where it comes up onto the Hyper Giga, just in front of the eye, on that little bone ridge. So here I'm doing the same measurements, from that little bone to the start of the tail. And yes, the tail is a lot longer, about 1 inch longer than it should be for the Hyper Giga. So I'm going to have to cut that off and rework it. So that's the tail all cut off, and now I'm going to sand it smooth. And then I will continue on with the back scales, now that I'm happy with the length of the tail. It was a bit sad to cut off his tail. It would have been cool to keep it that long, but I wanted to make sure that I pushed this sculpt as far as I could to looking like the Hyper Giga. I didn't want to give any leeways this time. Usually with some models I give some leeways because I'm just changing and customizing the model. This time I was wanting to push it the full distance to a Hyper Giga. And that meant cutting off some of its tail. More tail scales. Now I'm beginning sculpting on the face. So I've done both arms and now I'm pushing the face's scales on. I'm just using my silicone tool to blend it on and then a dab of water just to smooth it all out. And then I'll come in with my toothbrush just to texture it all once I've shaped it. It was very finicky this part because it was so tiny and thin. As you can see, that's the other side. I'm just texturing it and shaping it. Back and forth with different tools. Now I'm rebuilding some of the bone structure because the Hyper Giga seems to have a lot of pointing or sharper bone effects on its face. I guess the archaeology profession calls it sort of glad wrapping, I think they call it. Now I'm coming in for I call it the neck beard. I know it's not called a neck beard, but I find it funny to call it a neck beard. I'm sculpting that in. And I'll come in with my different cutting tools and tweezers to sort of sculpt out the little spiky bits it has on the bottom of its neck beard. I should give this guy a fedora. So yes, I'm using my little pointy tool here and I'll come in with some tweezers just to squeeze out the points to make it easier for my fingers to pinch. There's no real easy way of doing these little spiky bits. Then I'm using my silicone tool just to blend out the spikes and extend them a bit more. Now begins the slow process of putting in the teeth. So I've rolled out some snakes of clay and I've smoothed them into the mouth and put little holes in using my silicone tool, and then I'm slipping pre-made teeth into those holes with tweezers. It is a very painful, slow process. This took me hours and hours to do, but so worth it in the end. So here you can see I'm pressing little holes in with my silicone tool, and then I'll be slipping teeth into those holes and then smoothing those holes a bit closed with the silicone tool, and once this all dries I'll be going over with a dab of glue on each tooth just to secure the teeth. Such a painful process just watching this again. Anyway, that's it all sculpted. Time to put a base coat on and see if my sculpting worked. And I'm quite happy with it. It seems to all be seamless all together and seems like one coherent model. Time to paint. So I'm starting off with a nice base coat of like a yellowy off-white brown, I guess you can call it. And this is from Jo Sonia. And I'm just going to cover the Hyper Giga completely in this coat. It's going to be basically my undertone for everything. Now I'm coming in with a more yellowy skin tone, Jo Sonja again. And I'm using my reference very closely and just eyeing the areas where this colour starts. And then I'm blending it out. So the Hyper Giga from a distance looks completely grey and black, but actually it's got a lot of shades to him. Now I'm coming in with a more yellow toned brown. So you can see I'm just slowly building up the sort of creamy browns and blending them into each other. Of course, referencing the whole time to eye where this colour actually starts. Now I'm coming in with a Citadel, very dark brown. It's kind of like dry brushing, where you come in the darker areas with the paint just on the brush and then you sort of really dry brush it out to blend it. I even wipe some on the table below just to make sure that I have very minimal amount of paint on there. It's very important to have a small amount of paint for the dry brushing of the stripes, because the stripes are very sort of speckled. They're not fully there. If that makes sense, I hope it does. Of course, when I'm doing the back scales and the tail scales, I can actually come in with proper amount of paint, because that is just completely brown. Now I'm continuing on with the face, and of course I'm sort of dry brushing again, that same effect where I come in with minimal amount of paint and sort of dry brush it out. And that's that brown layer on. Time to start on the mouth. So it's got a very, very sort of faded pink to pink to its lips. So I'm just sort of dry brushing that very, very lightly on. And now I'm coming in with the dark brown again, and I'm just dappling little spots on very light dry brush. But just light spots here and there. We're coming along nicely. So now I'm coming in with an ultra matte sort of grey tone, and I'm just adding it to the tips of some of the spikes. In the reference I'm using, it seems to have some lighter areas just on the very tips of its back spikes. And only some of them. So back in with some black, and I'm just going down the center of the back stripes just to darken them up. Back stripes, back armor. I'm just dabbing a little bit onto the leg stripes because they seem to be darker than the rest of the stripes on the body. And of course I'm painting the toes and claws. Can't forget the petty and manicure. So now I'm coming in with some yellow for the eyes. These eyes were so tiny, so I had to be very, very careful. Coming in with a Jo Sonja base coat of skin, and I'm just going on the inner sides of the mouth. the inner side, the inside of the mouth. This is basically my undercoat for the mouth. I'm trying to be very careful here and not getting the paint job I've already done on the outside of the mouth. Now doing the tiny little slit eye. This was a very delicate part. If I got it wrong, it meant I had to paint the whole eye again. Now I'm coming in with some nice Citadel pink, and I'm painting the tongue, and I'll be dry brushing around the teeth and gum areas to give it some more pink tones. And once that's done, I'll be giving it a coat of Mr. Super Clear. And I'll continue on with the mouth then. That was just to protect my out of mouth job from this paint job, I guess. Because I've already done so much work on the body, I didn't want the painting of the mouth wrecking my paint job on the outside. I'm coming with some skin tone again and just blending it in with my pink tones. Now it's time for the teeth. I'm coming in with some high flow white. That's the paint job. I'm very, very happy. I think it's time for a wash. But first, 3 coats of Mr. Super Clear to protect my paintwork. Now I'm using a Citadel wash, and I'm putting that very liberally over the whole body, including the mouth, just to give it some nice shadowy effects and bring out all the sculpted detail. And I did this after Mr. Super Clear, because if I do it before, it comes out with this weird scarring effect where it has a reaction with Mr. Super Clear. So to avoid that, I put the wash on after. And now I'm doing liquid latex varnish on the eyes and inner mouth and claws. This will also protect the teeth further. Now the base. So I'm tracing around my Giga and just placing him on the box where I want him and tracing around his feet and the sound card, just to position everything in my mind where it should be. And sorry for the continuity error here, but I'm trying to keep everything in line with each other, if that makes sense. So I've painted the box black, and now I'm going to drill some holes in to make room for the speaker and buttons. That's the holes cut out. Time to sculpt the environment. So first tinfoil, some new glue I'm using. I'm not too happy with the glue actually, it didn't quite work how I wanted. So I'm just using tinfoil here to bulk out the sort of cliff face I want to add. A small cliff face. And I was attempting to use this glue to hold the tinfoil down. Didn't work that well. So tinfoil is a great option when you're sculpting with Super Sculpey, just to bulk things out and keep it all light. So this is the Super Sculpey clay that I use. I'm rolling it through my pasta maker to thin it out and temper it, I think is the word for it. Prepare it ready for sculpting. That's my sheet of clay. And I'm using my bacon bond just to help the clay adhere to the box when I bake it. And yes, mine is sort of old bacon bond, but I'm refusing not to use it because it's still good. I'm laying my sheets of clay over the box, and just blending it all together and coming in with my knife just to trim the edges smooth. I gotta make sure my speaker and buttonhole is still visible too. And of course, if you want to use any of the materials I'm using, I have affiliate links linked down below. See how I'm just using my knife here just to straighten up the edges and smooth it all down. Get rid of the excess, essentially. So now I'm using my broken sound module just to impress where the buttons will go. Helps to keep broken things sometimes, just so you can use them for measurements. I'm just scraping away the excess clay here because I want them to sit flat just below the sculpture itself, if that makes sense. So now I'm using my silicone tool to start sculpting in the sort of lines and cracks in the sort of rocky cliff face. It's not really a cliff, it's more like a ledge, I should call it. And I'm using an Australian outback photo as my reference. Now I'm impressing my sculptures feet into the clay to figure out where I want him to sit. And I've just poked a hole in for where the metal bit of the wire will go to hold the sculpture in place, to give it some strength. And I'm using my silicone tool again to then carve in some more cracks and lines and different shapes and textures. Now I've got some 2-part epoxy rocks, which is what I use when I have excess 2-part epoxy. Rather than waste it, I make it into rocks. And I'll glue them down with bacon bond. And I'm using tinfoil here just to texture the environment. And if you're wondering why I'm doing a sort of a deserty or an outback, it's because on Instagram I take votes for what I should make sometimes. And this time everyone voted for a desert. So that's what I'm doing, an Australian desert sort of theme. And now we're ready to bake. Just got to do my little signature imprint first. So this is a little 3D printed stamp I got off Etsy. And I just imprint my signature in. And then I'm going to put it in the oven for the time stated on the box. Once it's baked, I'm using my Citadel sand texture and I'm spreading that across the lower part of the sculpture to bring in the sand. Texture paint is fantastic if you want to create sort of realistic environments. So this paint has a sand texture to it when it dries. Just spreading it all out with my silicone tool. So now I'm using my silicone tool again to imprint some sort of dino footprints, because I am assuming that a lot of dinosaurs ran away from the Hyper Giga, so I'm just putting some imprints now to sort of tell that story. You can't really see them now, but when I put a wash down you will be able to. So now I'm coming in with a nice beautiful red-brown tone and I'm going over the rock face with that. Coming in with a Jo Sonja yellowy brown, and I'm just scraping that and dabbing it in different areas. The great thing about painting natural things is you can go a bit wild with it and be free, sort of. Because if you be too rigid with where you put things, it doesn't look natural. So I sort of just let my hand flow in, feel my way through painting natural stuff. I'm coming in with a lighter tone of Joe Sonia paint again, just to add some more lighter tones to the rocky base. And now I'm adding some Joe Sonia lighter tones to the sand. Again, I'm just using my reference photo of the Australian outback just to make sure I'm matching the colours as best as I can. So now I'm painting the rocks with a nice reddy tone. From Citadel, of course. And I'll give the rocks the same treatment as I did the rock edge. I'm sure there's a proper scientific word for that. So now I'm coming in with some super glue, and I'm just gluing down the metal peg that will hold the Hyper Giga to the base. So now it's wash time. I'm coming in with a liberal amount of the wash over the rocky face. And I'll add it to the footprinted areas too, just to make them stand out. You can see how the wash really brings out all the shadows and really brings things to life. I really love my washes. You can see how the footprints automatically show up now. Fantastic stuff. So now I'm building the mesh speaker. So I'm just coming around with some 2-part epoxy over the mesh that I've tacked down with some super glue. And I'll be blending it out with some silicone and plastic tools and water. So now I'm coming in with a nice Citadel chrome silver. I'm just painting around the edge of the, I guess the drain pipe we'll call it now, where the speaker will go, just to blend it in with the environment a bit more. Give it a reason to be there, essentially. But I'll be hiding most of this under some sand. So now I'm coming back in with my sand effect and just blending in those edges again to make them a part of the environment, essentially. I haven't added the speaker yet because I want to keep things safe away from paint and water as much as I can. So now the speaker and buttons are glued down and installed. I have to be very careful from here on out because if I get wet, they're wrecked and I have to destroy part of the base getting them out. So I have to close in that hole with 2-part epoxy and some 3D paint just to seal in around the edge and create sort of a base that I can build my sand upon. So again, I'm coming in with some chrome Citadel silver and just painting over that orange paint to hide it a bit more. And then I'll come in with some sand. Again, I have to be very careful here because if any water gets in the speaker or the buttons or any paint, it's bye-bye sound module. I know that from experience. I've cried many times over wrecking these guys. I've learnt to be very careful. And that's the sculpture complete. The Hyper Giganotosaurus from the game The Isles. I really hope you like this guy. I'm very, very proud of him, and if you are interested in being the proud owner of this guy, please head over to my Instagram and make your bid. Good luck to everyone who makes a bid. And of course, yes, he does make sound. I think it's time we hear him roar. And there we have it. That's the Hyper Giga. I really hope you all enjoyed this video. Leave a like and a comment letting me know what you think, and I'll see you all on the next one. Thank you all for watching. Bye bye!